You're watching Palatinate TV.
Hello everyone, I'm Patrick, one of the news editors at Palatinate, and these are the interviews for the 2021 SU election. We have James here, who's running for SU president. James, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm James Burton. I'm a third year PPEist from St Chad's.
So firstly, why did you decide to run for the role of president?
So for me, why I decided to run was that I'd previously, this year I've been JCR president alongside my studies at Chad's, and it's been a really enjoyable opportunity, really rewarding opportunity to help students, to support students, to represent them, to fight for their interests and improve their experience. But beyond that, I'm passionate about making the SU more financially accountable to its students. I don't think that's always been pushed as much by other candidates. And my experience working in the colleges and the common rooms, I've met so many people who have so little interest in the SU or feel really detached from it, feel like it is not interesting for them, not something that they've got any desire. And to be honest, if it didn't exist altogether and the money that they got from university was repatriated elsewhere, they wouldn't mind a jiffy. So I think there is serious change that needs to occur. And my experience being JTR president over the last year has really made me passionate about wanting to take on this role at the SU.
Fantastic. We'll pick up on some of those threads in a minute. Other than being JCR president, what relevant experience would you say that you have?
So, apart from JCR president, last year I was faculty rep for social science and health for undergraduate level. So that meant I was working a lot within some of the SU institutions, working with some of the officers, the UG and PG academic in particular, working with members of staff, working to represent a massive group of students. Like very difficult to sort of imagine you're speaking for all of them, but going to university meeting, going to what was the faculty education committee meeting, and telling them what I'm hearing from students, and feeding it back and pushing for those to improve student experiences. Those are probably the two main really good experiences that I've had. Though throughout my time, I've done little pieces, bit of stuff. I've enjoyed working at Purple Radio previously, doing shows there, working on charity committees, working with the governing body of St Chad's, and it's given me some really good experience and a bit of a rounded experience of parts of Durham life.
So just moving on to what the role of the president actually really involves. What do you think the most important thing that the president does is?
A very good question. To me, probably the most important thing the president does is their ability to communicate with the wider student experience and really message to the students what the SU is, what it does. The weekly emails, the speech at the start of Freshers Week, things, interviews with Palatinate, really, or with all kinds of student media. That kind of communication is, I think, the most important thing. How you can portray the SU in a way that really galvanizes students. There are a lot of staff in the SU, and there's a lot of other sabbatical officers. And I'm not saying that the SU president does nothing sort of functional operation behind, does a lot of stuff. But to me, what the SU president, what sticks out to me is that sort of that one point that you can say, yes, that is what get my communications from the SU. They are someone who's accountable to the students. They're someone who is recognizable. Their attitude towards the SU embodies the SU. And I think that's probably the most important thing to me when I think about what the SU president does.
So the manifestos haven't been published yet, but I understand will be soon. Could you just briefly outline for us what your manifesto and your campaign is all about? So
in the first instance, I've been talked to a lot of students about the SU, and most of them, freshers, second years, third years alike, they don't know what the SU does. They don't know how their money is being spent. They don't know, or where SU finances go. They know that the SU has a lot of money, and they know that the SU has a lot of staff, but they don't know what exactly where it's going. Is it being used most efficiently? They don't know anything about the inside of it, and I think that brings a massive amount of apathy towards it, a massive amount of distaste. Anything that comes out of the SU is immediately seen as a terrible decision. I'm not trying to defend the SU. I think some of them are really poor decisions, but it makes it even worse if you don't know what's going on there. You don't know anything about it. It's this faceless place. So I want to start a debate and a free and frank discussion on the SU's finances, the SU's, the SU, some of that part of the SU, which I don't think has always been discussed well and really, brought students on the side. I also am passionate about taking my experience from the common rooms, working with JCR PresCom this year, but also dealing with some of the issues which are faced by common room presidents that the university chucks at them, that makes things so much harder to put on important parts of wider student experience, be it social events, be it other bits and pieces. Finding a way that the SU can come in to support these common rooms is going to be vital. The SU strategy is coming up for renewal this year. So this is a great chance to look at this relationship between the SU and common rooms. And with a lot of students really saying that they are most at home in their common rooms, it's time that the SU really listens to that. And finally, I'm sorry I ramble a bit here, but the most, but to me, once you can get that buy-in from students who are interested in common rooms, once you get that buy-in from students who now maybe understand where their money is going and maybe feel like it's being used more efficiently to actually effectively get them benefits, in work, all the kind of things that the SU does do in the background, then we can start actually working to achieve aims of getting everyone on board, getting mass student action to achieve the aims the SU's talked about again and again, be it in accommodation costs, living in, living out, all that kind of stuff, I think can be so much more effectively dealt with when you've got everyone on board and you can actually start saying, look, we can try and do some serious mass student work here.
So kind of leading on from that, what would you try to do differently from your predecessor?
I think being more critical of what exactly the SU does is probably what I would be really passionate about doing. Talking about the, going into the SU and saying not just just sort of supporting everything the SU does, but being critical in exactly what's going on behind the scenes, and really trying to explain that to students, putting that at the center of what we do. Explain every decision in terms of how much consultation it's got, who's making the decisions, how it was happening, and this sort of openness and frankness and putting our hands up and saying, look, this is what was going on inside, I think is absolutely vital. I think always has been done before, because a lot of students are passionate about the SU and don't always see some of its faults, which I think the majority of students do see and do feel on the day-to-day basis.
So one of the current president's kind of flagship policies was the Culture Commission. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you kind of do with that, adapt it, or what would you do with that going forward?
What I would do with the Culture Commission is, obviously, from what I understand, it's just sort of finished its first phase of research, and now it's looking to sort of nuance its work and go forward. By the time that I would become to take on the SU president position, hopefully there will be the start of some recommendations, something that's tangible, something that can be held onto and fought for. So the SU strategy, as I mentioned before, coming up for debate or coming up for renewal, putting it in there, putting some of these really key recommendations in there, and with everything that a lot of the things that the SU does, keeping these things in mind. I think that it is a really good piece of work, and it can hopefully do a lot, because there's a lot wrong with Durham. continually appears in the newspapers for a series of really unpleasant instances. And if this can do anything to help them, then that's can only be a good thing. But I think it's best grounded when students can actually see that there's something that this work's been done and we can actually get results. And for me, that's what's important about it, actually saying that once you get some recommendations, pursuing them as hard as possible, and then reporting back to students to say, look, this is how we've been able to listen to this work, this massive body of work that's gone. It hasn't just been wasted.
And the SU, I think it was in November, December, published a democracy review, which is a very detailed document. But firstly, just what are your thoughts on the democracy review?
So to me, the democracy review was an expensive project that once again, I think that people were taken aback by it when they heard it from that, probably because once again, people don't understand or didn't feel part of the discussion about the finances and where the money was going. But the money's been spent and the expensive results are in. Now that they're there, it points to a series of recommendations that must be acted on. I know that Anna will be, continue working away at achieving, to do with that. There is much to reform about SU democracy, and I think that's really important. But what I'm most sort of hit by is the amount that students are interacting with their common rooms and identifying with their common rooms over and above anything they're doing with their SU. If you look at it, 4% say they disagree or strongly disagree with the idea that they see themselves more identifying with their common rooms than with their SU, which is saying a lot. And when you read something like the SU strategy, which mentions the common rooms far more in passing, you can start to see where some of these issues are really coming ahead. So to me, that was the real interesting and important findings.
So leading on from that, I've identified kind of 2 points about the democracy review. The first is a stat about around a quarter of respondents think that there is room for debate and discourse at Durham SU, which is quite concerningly low. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the assemblies is part of that. I think people don't understand exactly what goes on in that kind of place. I think that students feel like that there are certain people who are always, parts of certain debates, that they're the ones that they say the part is 25%. But a lot of people don't feel like they're inside of that discussion. So we do need to look at reforming parts of assembly, having a really strong debate about that. I myself, as someone who's looking to talk about finances more, have this debate, would want to bring in these voices that aren't being heard to and listened to, and so they feel like there actually is this freedom to debate. There's this freedom to criticise the SU. It's not it's a union. It shouldn't be a firm or a business, an institute, some sort of thing that comes with its own set of institutional interests. It is a union for the students. So it's really worrying that the students don't feel they've even got the chance to step in there.
And secondly, just under half of students agreed that students from all backgrounds are welcome within the organisation.
I mean, that's another really worrying statistic. I mean, if anything, the SU should be the heart of some of of inclusivity. I think, we've talked about the Culture Commission as something that can hopefully work to improve that, and listening to the students' issues that come from that, about them not feeling like they're included within the, that they're feeling like they're left out of the SU. There's much to work on that, and listen to voices more. But yeah, no, exactly. There's a lot of work going on in terms of that, and it seriously does need to continue.
You partly answered my. Oh, what's that? Sorry. You've partly answered my next question, but do you think that the SU should try to appeal to all students? Because the democracy review revealed that there are lots of students who are either just apathetic to the SU or actually fundamentally quite opposed to it? And how would you try to kind of put that into practice?
I think it's absolutely vital we get every student on board. It's more important to try and bring in these voices who are so opposed to the SU in order to make them feel comfortable and at home in the SU. In my opinion, a lot of this comes from a perspective of people who are interested in what their common room stuff do, but have no real connection to their SU. So if the SU can say, look, we're helping support common rooms, we can actually be one of the most effective forces in supporting the common rooms financially, supporting them with the staffing structure, supporting them in terms of bringing together all the common room voices to more effectively deal with situations. Then people can hopefully come in to support the SU, standing behind a bit in terms of the common rooms. And beyond that, the financial side I've already pointed on before, I think it does really come down to that. Students are, if anything, fantastically efficient users of their money, and they hate to see things that aren't the money that isn't being spent well, or at least they can't understand where this money is being spent well. So I think that if we can talk about those kind of issues, we can bring people on board. People see their common rooms as efficient financial institutions. They don't see the SU as such.
And there also seems to be a lot of people kind of put the hostility to the SU down to what was quite a controversial election last year. But there are also a lot of first-year students who have already become quite apathetic to the SU. What do you think should be done to try to support and interest first years kind of quite early on?
That's a really good point. I live with a few freshers quite a few freshers in my household bubble in Chaz, and I hear exactly the same thing. I think that one of the most important things we can do going forward is try and get the SU buildings open as quickly as possible, getting people into the buildings, feeling like that, at least that space, if anything, is going to be there for them. And on the other point, a lot of them come back to the same issues that students have day in, day out about how their money is being spent, about how what they see as important parts of Durham aren't being represented in the SU in terms of common rooms. That is, these same issues come up again and again. And just because they were bashed out and discussed at length last election doesn't mean that they've been solved. If anything, for a lot of them, some of them have been partially solved, a lot of them have continued. So it's unsurprising that we've seen some freshers, or a lot of freshers, just buying into exactly the same dislike of the SU as has been running for such a long time now.
So just to follow up on some of the stuff you've been talking about, you talked about financial accountability. How would you actually put that into practice? What does it look like in concrete terms?
So to me, I think it would be a piece of work that I would want to take on in terms of putting a lot of time beside it, starting from working or talking to those in the SU about how those on the financial side who can start to explain or put together something that's going to explain in detail or at least explain some broad things about finances. And then once this information is sort of available, or at least can be sort of floated, or at least once or even just straight away, just talking to students about the facts and figures about what is going on, talking about them in the street, hopefully once COVID ends, encouraging people to come to the same working groups and town halls and specific groups of talking to them. When people come to the SU to talk about their issues, once these sort of figures are more well known, and once people understand it more, and talk about and wanting to talk about it, but also going to them in terms of stalls outside the SU, things on the sites, like things that people will come and going to people and saying, look, this is what the SU does, this is what their 27 staff members do, this is what this is where how much money they get, this is where they're spending it, and then people will then be, once it's blasted to them, they can then start forming an opinion on it, and we can then go from there about, if we want to make, what changes need to be made. But at the least, people now know, oh, okay, well, there's a lot of money being spent on welfare. I support that, or there's a lot of money being spent in other important places.
And do you have any final things you'd just like to add or clarify or anything?
Nothing in particular. I'm really looking forward to the elections coming up. And I think it's going to be a fun and fair contest. Now we've got some HUS coming up, the SU and in the colleges as well. So that's going to be a really exciting opportunity to talk about some really important ideas. And hopefully we can get a large amount of student engagement. So I do encourage students to come out to vote and get involved and see this as a really important election for the SU.
Brilliant. Thank you.